You're about to say something in your native language, the one you've spoken since childhood, and suddenly the word just isn't there. Instead, what appears in your mind, crystal clear and immediate, is the word in your second language, the one you learned years later, the one that supposedly isn't as deeply rooted in your brain. If you're bilingual, you know exactly what this feels like. And it's strange, isn't it? The language that should be automatic, effortless, sometimes feels like it's hiding just out of reach, while a word you learned in adulthood arrives first. This isn't a glitch. It's not a sign that you're losing your native language or that something's wrong with your memory. What's actually happening reveals something fascinating about how your brain organizes language and how the words we use are tied not just to definitions, but to entire webs of experience, emotion, and context. Let's start with what's going on beneath the surface. When you're bilingual, your brain doesn't store your two languages in separate, sealed compartments. Both languages are active at the same time, even when you're only speaking one. Neuroscientists have found that when a bilingual person hears or reads a word, both language systems light up. Your brain is constantly managing a kind of friendly competition between languages, deciding which one gets to produce the word you need in that moment. So why does your second language sometimes win? The answer has to do with something called contextual encoding. Every word you know isn't just a definition floating in isolation. It's connected to the circumstances in which you learned it, the environments where you use it most, and the emotions or ideas it carries for you personally. This is true for everyone, but for bilinguals, it creates something unexpected. Think about it this way. If you learned your second language as an adult, you probably learned a lot of specialized vocabulary in that language first. Maybe you studied psychology in English, even though English isn't your native language. Or you work in tech and all the terminology you encounter daily is in your second language. You might have learned to cook following recipes in Spanish, or you discuss philosophy with friends in French. When that happens, those words, those concepts, they get encoded in your brain with that language attached. Not because the other language can't express the same idea, but because your lived experience of that concept happened in your second language. Here's where it gets interesting. Your brain doesn't retrieve words based solely on which language you learned first. It retrieves them based on accessibility. And accessibility is determined by how recently and how frequently you've used a word, and in what context. If you spend your workday talking about algorithms in English, even if you're a native Portuguese speaker, algorithm in English might be more accessible to you than algoritmo in Portuguese. Not because you don't know the Portuguese word, but because the English version has been reinforced more often in the specific context you're currently in. Have you ever noticed this happens more with certain types of words than others? It's not random. Abstract concepts, technical terms, words related to specific life domains, these are the ones that tend to pop up in your second language first. Meanwhile, words for basic objects, childhood experiences, or emotions often stay firmly rooted in your native language. That's because those early words were encoded during a time when you only had one language. They're tied to sensory memories, to your family, to a version of yourself that existed before your second language entered the picture. There's also an emotional dimension that matters more than we might expect. Some bilingual speakers report that they can discuss difficult topics more easily in their second language. They feel a kind of emotional distance that makes hard conversations more manageable. This isn't about caring less. It's about the fact that emotionally charged words in your native language carry the full weight of your earliest experiences. Your second language, learned later, didn't absorb all of that intensity. The reverse can be true too. If you fell in love in your second language, if you built deep friendships or had transformative experiences while speaking it, certain words in that language will carry emotional resonance that the translated versions in your native tongue simply don't have. Language and experience are inseparable. What this means is that being bilingual doesn't create a hierarchy where one language is primary and the other is secondary. Instead, you develop what researchers call a distributed semantic system, where different parts of your knowledge, your identity, your memories are more strongly connected to one language or the other. Your brain is optimizing for efficiency, not for loyalty to your first language. So when that second language word arrives before the one in your native tongue, your brain isn't confused. It's just taking the shortest path to the meaning you're trying to express. It's drawing on the network that's most activated in that moment, based on everything you've been doing, thinking about, or experiencing recently. This is actually one of the most elegant things about bilingualism. Your mind becomes more flexible, more context-sensitive. You're not translating, you're thinking in the language that fits the situation. And sometimes, that language is the one you learned second. The next time it happens, the next time you reach for a word in your native language and your second language offers it up instead, you might see it differently, not as a failure of memory, but as evidence of how deeply your second language has woven itself into the way you understand the world. You're not losing anything. You're carrying two systems that work together, each one stepping forward when it's best suited for the task. If this resonates with your experience, or if you've noticed patterns in which words appear in which language for you, I'd be curious to hear about it in the comments. And if you're interested in more explorations of how our minds navigate language, memory, and meaning, consider subscribing. There's always more to uncover about how we think.